We're on chapter 12. Next week we'll start counseling. As I said before, you can turn your character in. Colsey's already turned yours in like 3 days after we started the class. I've got Earlson's, I've got Scott's now, I've got Levi's. Yeah, you gave me yours last time. Okay. Did you give me yours? Just give me yours? Yeah, you gave me yours. That's right over there. It's got your name right on top. Okay. Okay. But if you don't have yours ready yet, don't worry about it. Well, everybody in here has theirs in right now, so except for Emery. But don't worry about it. You can fill it out on Monday.
I have the bulk of mine done. I just want to
That's fine. That's fine.
polish it a little more and.
That's okay. So those individuals who are not here right now and who haven't filled out their form, we'll fill it out on Monday, which is normally what's going to happen to you. Anyway, you'll give somebody a form and they'll forget to fill it out, or they'll bring it in and they spilled, chili on it or something or whatever. So you have to give them a new form to fill out. Happens all the time. We'll take care of that on Monday, I hope. Next week is Halloween. It is. It's Halloween on Thursday. Are you going to go to Day of the Dead?
I can't find a ride down there,
Ah.
so next year.
Day of the Dead.
Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah, isn't that the first? It's the first, I think. I didn't
Should
think-
you
Is
take the
Where?
thing right here?
Transit?
Yeah,
I don't know.
and then you'll go to, well, it goes to Gallup, right?
Go to Winter Rock and then you transfer onto the bus coming from to the city, and that one goes into Gallup.
There you go.
Wait, is there one in Gallup?
I don't know.
I
I've been
was
to
like
the
asking
one,
him like.
I've been to the one in East LA, where it's like,
Oh, I went to the one in Tijuana.
they get deep into it.
It was
man.
really, really cool.
It's like
You've
2
been
days.
to one?
Yeah. Well, we were going down to Tijuana and it just happened to be
Oh, okay.
happening when we went there.
Oh, yeah.
It was
We're
awesome.
in San Diego.
Yeah.
It's like Carnival. Okay, so what are we doing? We're understanding the client's problems. Client's problems can be very, very complicated. This may be a problem. A lot of times they'll just give you little pieces of information. You want them to tell you what their problem is, but they'll give you one of their 17 problems. And so you think that this is the only problem they've got, and all of a sudden you're kind of digging into what's going on, and all of a sudden another problem comes out. Why didn't you tell me about this in the beginning? I don't know why they don't. Maybe they're in denial, but then all of a sudden, yeah, of course, you're working on those two problems, and then another problem comes out. This is the way clients usually do things. They will come in for a fairly superficial problem, and they've got one that is much, much deeper. So this is the way that counseling works. The process of coming to an agreement on problems and goals involves a thoughtful and complete assessment. But you can't do a complete assessment unless they tell you what their problem is. And eventually that will come out. Eventually all their problems will come out. Sometimes it'll take months to get all their problems out. Sometimes it'll take months to get beyond the first superficial problem that they've told you about. It is important to work on what the client is ready to solve, not what the practitioner might think is important. This is one of the things that you have to deal with when you're dealing with clients, is the fact that there's a reason why they told you about their superficial problem. That's the only one they really want to talk about. It may be deeper than that. I was talking to somebody the other day, they were talking about the fact that, let's see, how in the world would this work? It ended up that they were being abused, but they didn't want to talk about that. That's not what they wanted to talk about initially. What they wanted to talk about was them not being able to get along with their children, was what they wanted to talk about initially. As we got into that problem, it turned out that the individual, the reason that their kids were having problems was because they didn't respect this parent, because the other parent was abusing them. And it took forever to get that piece of information out, just forever. It wasn't my idea that they were having that problem. So one of the ways that you can explore the problem, what is the extent of your problem? You can ask this question, will you get a straight answer? Probably not. They're only gonna tell you what they wanna tell you anyway. How is the problem affecting your life? This is how I got to the problem with the abusive spouse. We're in that's kind of a situation where the individual is saying, yes, I'm being abused, I can handle it, everything's gonna be okay, but her kids are still small. As soon as the kids get larger and her spouse starts abusing or potentially abusing the children, now the whole dynamic has changed. Right now, she's willing to put up with whatever crap this guy puts out, but in the future, she may have a problem if he starts abusing the children. How long has this problem been in existence? You're not gonna get the right answer. Usually, if somebody hits somebody else, the first time they hit them, they discount it. He was drunk, I pissed him off, the food wasn't any good, you know, they will rationalize the first time that they were abused. And maybe they'll rationalize the second time, and maybe they'll rationalize the third time. And then the fourth time, now that they have a black eye, and everybody's saying, well, what happened to you? Now they're thinking, this is when the problem started. No, the problem started the first time he hit you, not the fourth time he hit you. Okay. So they will probably not give you very good information as far as when it occurred.
Is it not that they're hiding it, but more or less they're probably not aware?
They rationalized the first 3 times. Yeah. And you're right, they're not aware. They didn't see it as a problem. And it didn't start until they started seeing it as a problem, even though it started, you know, the day after they got married or whatever. Exactly. How frequently does this problem happen and how bad does it get? I had a student up north. She had a boyfriend, and he went out drinking with his friends, and every time he drinks whiskey, he gets violent, and so he came home and popped her in the eye. She came to school the next day, and I said, well, what happened? And she gave me the story. She said, oh, it'll never happen again. He only gets violent. He's a really wonderful guy, unless he has had whiskey to drink. Okay. It'll never happen again. He said it'll never happen again. It was his friends. They took him out and fed him whiskey. But he's not going to go out with those friends anymore. Well, he didn't go out with those friends anymore. The next time he drank whiskey was when she gave it to him. And he popped her again. Came to school. I talked to her about it. She said, it'll never happen again. It was my fault. I gave him the whiskey. Somebody gave me whiskey, and so I don't drink whiskey, so I gave it to him. I forgot that he gets violent when he drinks whiskey. That was the second time, okay. The third time he went out with other friends, and they fed him whiskey. Okay, so how bad does it get? That's the question. And she was rationalizing this whole time. This time she said, that's it. You know, I kept telling her, well, you know, if this continues to happen, then you're in an abused relationship. And eventually, I convinced her that was true, so she left the guy. And it was like the next day that she got back with him. I mean, it was almost instantaneous that she got back with him. Anyway, eventually she broke up with him and she found another guy. But her problem was that she was being abused. And she needed to deal with it, but she couldn't. What is the cause of your problem? Of course, they're not going to understand what the cause of their problem is. Sometimes it has to do with something that happened to them as a child. They were trying to impress their father. They were trying to impress their mother. They were trying to get their mother to give them affection. So they started acting in a select way. And this has caused a problem that it started when they were a child, and now, of course, they are an adult and it's still causing a problem. So what's the cause of their problem? They're not gonna know. Probably. They're not going to recognize the problem. Remember I told you about the young lady, it was one of the first counseling sessions I ever had. This lady had on the sundress and she kept flipping, kept showing me her cleavage and flipping her hair over her head. Remember I told you about that? Well, her problem was the fact that she was a mama's girl, she was a daddy's girl. That was her problem. But she didn't know that. And she was married to a guy that she was a very seductive individual, but she would act out in front of her husband, but she didn't want her husband to have sex with her. It was really kind of a strange situation. Well, what was the situation? The situation was that she was a daddy's girl. She'd always tried to impress her father. This is the only way that she could get any attention from her father was to flirt with him, as weird as that is. And so, since this wasn't her father, she didn't want to follow through on her flirtation. And this is how she controlled people, was with this flirtation, because she learned that from her father. Okay. Do you think she knew that? Did you think she realized that? It took forever to figure this out. Well, it didn't take forever, it took a while. But she, of course, was in denial about everything. She loved her husband, and her father had just died, it was the whole thing. Okay. Are you living in an environment that will allow the problem to return? This is a question that you can that you need to ask people. Is it the environment when you're with your friends? Do you have this problem? If so, then it is the environment, and potentially you need to change your environment. Is the problem worse because you haven't dealt with it? And this will always be yes. They're not dealing with it. Of course, they have come in trying to solve their problem. But this is the only way that they've tried to deal with it. A lot of times, especially select groups of individuals, and I hate to pick on an ethnic group, but Asians want you to fix their problem. So if you have a client who's Chinese or Vietnamese or Korean or whatever, and they come in to talk to you, they'll want to talk. They want you to tell them how to fix their problem. That's how they function. So have they dealt with it? Probably not. Is this a superficial problem or one that goes deeper, requiring extensive therapy? Usually they will give you a superficial problem, one that is fairly easy to solve. But then, of course, once you start talking to them, now we're getting into a deeper and deeper problem. So a lot of times the only reason they come in isn't because of the superficial problem that they're talking about, like their children are misbehaving. That wasn't really her problem. Her problem was the fact that she was being abused by her husband. That was the real problem. So the superficial problem was relatively simple. Of course, there's nothing you could do about that. The only way to fix the children misbehaving was to stop the abuse. Was the way to change the children's behavior. The children had no respect for her because, well, for one thing, the father was telling the children that they didn't have to do what the mother was saying. As weird as that is. How urgent is it that the problem be solved? And usually it's fairly urgent, otherwise they wouldn't be coming in and spending all that money to get you to help them. Is it possible that this problem is the symptom of a more serious problem? And of course, that was exactly what happened with the children that weren't behaving properly. It was a symptom. It wasn't really the problem. The problem was the abuse. That was the problem. Considerations of any problem include financial remuneration. Can they afford to see a counselor? Client time constraints, how often can they come in? Sometimes their problem is so severe that they need to come in more than once a week. Can they do that? Do they have time to do that? And the other problem is, how much time do you have? And how much time can you spend with that select individual? any one time. So when we're dealing with a crisis, the practitioner might have to act without fully exploring all the problems due to crisis status. If somebody's being abused, this is something that needs to stop right away. Otherwise, there might be permanent damage done. They might be killed. So this is an emergency situation that needs to stop today. So a lot of times you can't really delve into what else is going on with this individual. You have to deal with the abuse. The immediate crisis situation will have to be dealt with first before you can address other problems. It's like if you have somebody that is, let's see, wait a minute. Somebody is depressed and they are drinking to take care of their depression. Which one do you deal with first, the depression or the alcoholism? The alcoholism, or wait a minute, the depression is forcing them to drink. So they're using the drinking to cope with their depression, right? So which one do you fix first? Which one do you work on first?
The depression. Because that's causing it. Yeah.
Right, that's the way it seems like it should be. But until you can stop them from drinking, until you can stop them from using their coping mechanism, then they're going to continue to be depressed.
So in this case, alcoholism is the superficial problem?
Yeah, well, it's a coping technique.
Okay.
Okay, so you have to get rid of the coping technique.
I think I agree with you with alcohol too, because when a person's drinking, it takes them a certain amount of time to stop, after they stop drinking, to see things a little bit differently.
Right.
Because when they're still drinking, when they're still using, they view things a little skewed.
Exactly. Takes away the reasoning portion of the brain. So you have to deal with the drug abuse or the alcohol abuse first. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Then we can solve whatever other problem they have. They are using, we can always treat them with a antidepressant, but you don't want to do that if they're drinking. You can't take antidepressants if you're drinking. So you need to take care of their drinking problem first, or their drug problem, because that will interfere with whatever else you're trying to do. Potentially.
So I guess that's the same lines as what you're talking about, having an emergent situation. Is their physical well-being
Exactly.
goes first.
Right. So let's say somebody's suicidal, they're depressed, and they're drinking alcohol. Which one do you take care of first? Well, you have to take- Well, yeah, you want to keep them alive, but when people commit suicide, usually, a lot of times they've been drinking before they commit suicide. So if we can stop them from drinking, we may take away their suicidal tendencies. As much fun as all that sounds. Okay.
So there's there's steps.
Yeah, you need to take care of the crisis first. And the crisis in this case is not their depression, their crisis, that is their base symptom. It's the superficial symptom of their coping technique, their alcoholism. So we'll take away their drinking first. And once we take care of that, then we can work on the depression. Because they're using the alcohol as a coping technique for the depression. But the practitioner may have to be more directive. A lot of times we just like to listen. This is one time when you get to talk. So you're going to tell them, stop it. And that's sometimes dealing with crisis situations, dealing with interpersonal violence would include murder, of course. It would include rape. It would include terrorist bombings. It would, crisis situations dealing with major natural disasters would include floods, would include tornadoes. Has anybody ever been in a tornado?
No.
Near one.
Oh, wait, there was one in Chile, wasn't there?
Did it look like this?
No.
Okay.
That's the only closest one.
Oh, jeez, okay.
Have you?
They always put Air Force bases, you guys were in the Marines and the Army. They always put Air Force bases in the worst possible places they.
Tornado prone.
Well, it has to be flat, so, yeah, so they're always tornado prone. So the ones in North Texas and in West Texas, in Oklahoma, in New Mexico was on the western, or eastern side of New Mexico.
Speaking of, wasn't there one in Fort Worth or something?
Yeah,
That
there's
was-
an Air Force base there. They
Oh,
sold.
tornado.
And there was a tornado that ripped through the area.
I was almost in a tornado once. When I was in high school, I was going to school in Tuba City, and on a Saturday, we were in the dorms, we hitchhiked to Flagstaff. And at the end of the day, we were hitchhiking back to Tuba City, me and my friend were in high school. The weather got really rough. Thankfully, this guy stopped for us, picked us up, as we left Flagstaff. With about 30 minutes later, we were almost back to Tuba City, and came over the radio that a tornado touched down right, like about a mile away from where we were hitchhiking.
Wherever it's flat. Tornadoes will stay on the ground where it's flat. As soon as they hit a mountain or something, they'll just pop back up. Or if they have to go down, they'll stay up.
There was one almost here in Saley last year. The funnel cloud, the guy came over to our house, and he was coming from wheat fields, and he took a picture of the funnel cloud. It didn't touch down, but it was forming. You could see it moving a couple people.
It's different. Montana gets hit all the time too.
Microburst,
I'm sorry?
microburst.
Yeah, microburst. One time I was driving to a softball game and everything, all the trash in the ditch just suddenly flew up in the air. And I could feel my car, I was in a Miata, of course I was in a Miata. And so I could feel, yeah, that's right. I could feel my car just lifting off the ground. I wasn't getting any traction. It didn't pick me up. I was okay. Natural disasters would include fires in your house. Would include hurricanes. Has anybody ever been in a hurricane?
I've slept through a couple. North Carolina, and Okinawa.
Close, when I was at Schofield.
Schofield Bears? Yeah.
They used to have hurricane parties in Okinawa. They'd lock you in your room, and you gotta stormproof your window, and they just throw in a box of MREs into your room, and
Oh, is that right?
you have a bunch of candles, and because the power's gonna go out, and you start playing cards with everybody. Right before the hurricane, there's a long line to the PX, about a quarter mile of people coming out with beer. The PX, when there's this hurricane coming, they'll pre-stop with beer because they
Is
know
that right?
everybody's gonna be drinking through the.
Do you remember what it felt like before that hurricane hit? How the barometric pressure just crashed? You could feel it. It's depressing. It just takes all of the energy out of you or something. It's really amazing. Yes, so barometric pressure, or tornadoes are the same way. You can feel a tornado just before it hits, because the barometric pressure just crashes. So it's almost like you've got all this gravity doubles or triples, and everything's pushing in on you. It's really kind of exciting. It's not exciting, it's just it's it's painful. Yeah, hurricanes are pretty bad, tornadoes are pretty bad too. Crisis situations dealing with personal loss would include unexpected death of a family member, abandonment of a significant other. Of course, this has happened to me all too frequently.
You're
I'm easy to
going
leave.
through an easy 4 years of the military, right, with all these things.
Oh, this is a cycle.
It's just life in the military here.
It is important to stay calm and remember that safety is the first priority. You need to make sure that they're safe. You need to make sure that they have someplace to be. Someplace to be that is safe. Use skills of listening, asking questions for clarification, express empathy and warmth to this select individual. That's not empathy.
I was like,
okay.
You said empathy, you
I
have to
said
show empathy.
But not tears, okay? Seek supervision as soon as possible. One of the things that will happen, if you're with this person in a crisis situation, a lot of times the empathy will cause you to lose your focus. So you will start feeling the same way that they are. And this is one of the reasons why you need to seek supervision as quickly as you possibly can. Somebody from outside who isn't dealing with the crisis, so that they can look in and make sure that everything's okay.
What if they got nowhere to go? What do you do?
You put them where, the most secure area that you possibly can. And being around you is security, can be seen as security. It's like when, you're talking to another vet and you say, I got your back. Or
What
you
I'm saying, like, if they can't go home, they had nowhere else to go.
Exactly.
What do you do?
Right, but you need to make them as safe as you possibly can. Make them as comfortable as you possibly can. Stay with them because you are their safety blanket.
So you just have to sleep over in your freaking office?
No.
I
Yes, I mean,
don't know.
if that works, I mean, what you need to do is you need to make sure that they're safe. They can't go home because that may be the crisis. That is the crisis that's taking place. You need to make them feel safe. It's one of the reasons why when they have tornadoes, they have hurricanes, they bring people into gymnasiums and whatnot. Why? Because that is the most secure area they can find, and that's what they need to do. Does that make sense?
You just put them in a room or something?
Not alone, don't leave them alone. You are their security blanket, so you need to stay with them.
So, you probably can't take them back to your house, but maybe there's like those halfway houses and things like that.
Exactly.
You can just go with them to that and just stay with
Exactly,
them?
and stay with them until the crisis is over with, yes, sir.
Are there, in any of our classes, do they ever talk about the resources available on the reservation?
Actually, I was talking about that with Jeremiah yesterday. Of course, Jeremiah has worked in the field over the last 10 years on the reservation, so he knows all the resources that are available. We were talking about the MMDR movement, them trying to figure out what they're going to do with murdered and missing women on the reservation. And we were talking about creating a task force. What else were we talking about? Oh, safe houses in the area. I guess there are some safe houses, not a lot, not enough. And not enough in areas where there are people. And I thought, well, geez, this sounds like something that we could do. We could find money to support these safe houses. We could man these safe houses. Because the reality is that you can't just have a safe house and say, go live there by yourself. You need security there. You need somebody there to watch over the individuals, to deal with the crisis.
If there's someone that knows about it, the person who's after that person's gonna know about it too.
That's a possibility, but that's why we need other people there. That's why somebody needs to be there, making sure this person is secure. So we would have to man the place 24 hours a day with somebody. Somebody would have to be there, making sure everything was okay.
Pool CQ.
I'm sorry?
Someone's got a pool CQ.
Exactly.
My aunt, she's a social worker, but when she used to work with, when she was first starting, kind of down a little lower, she used to have to go on raids with police when they would do raids. If they thought there were children in the home or something like that, but they oftentimes, kids end up sleeping on the floor inside the trailer at social services for like a week, because they were trying to find places for them, because the tribe had no money, or there was nothing set up
Exactly.
for it, you know.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, there's funding for this kind of stuff. We could find funding for this kind of stuff. But it's something Jeremiah's gonna have to deal with. And talk about, because he's the one that's working with MMDR. We need secure places on the reservation, for, not just for women, but for anybody that's in crisis.
And there's no detox or rehabs either on the reservation. Everybody gets sent somewhere else, and it's kind of sad.
Always money. It always has to do with money. I've never been on a reservation where you guys are so bad at finding grants. Other reservations, they find grants, they fund these kinds of places, but there's something going on here. It's like, you want to be sovereign, but, I mean, the only way that you can support everybody is with grants and funding these types of places.
Well, I think other tribes that are smaller, they kind of have an advantage, they have to rely on it. And us, we're a little bit bigger. And,
You're the biggest.
Yeah, well, yeah. And one of the problems that comes with that is with our tribal government, is a lot of these are presidential appointees. So people in these director positions, so people have no idea what they're doing just because they're related to so-and-so, they're an in-law to so-and-so, get put in these director
As
positions.
long as they make the money, I guess that's all that's important. So let's just remember that money's the most important thing. Is that what we said last time?
I think they were putting more money into the jail, because now, like, I'm kind of hearing people.
There's a reason that they did that.
Yeah, because people who go in, you know, pretty common, like, they go in a lot, they're saying, oh yeah, like, they're telling other people, like, they have better food, they have
Sure.
better beds, they said, they have games now, and you're like, I'm gonna go back.
That was
And
the
then I'm
Bush
like,
administration. That's the only money they had for the reservations. They were
Yeah,
going to increase the police forces and they were going to build new jails.
Yeah, but you can't get in trouble over there. I mean, you practically have to freaking, I don't know, kill somebody or something, man.
And then we don't catch
My
it.
dad used to tell me that people would like rob banks
Yeah,
and bam, jump on the red.
there's no cops here.
Exactly.
Oh, I guess jurisdiction is another issue, like.
Exactly.
Chinle, just recently, somebody stabbed someone else in the courtroom in front of officers, and they let him go.
Oh, no.
There were plenty of, it happened in front of the judge, it happened in front of the prosecutor, in front of the defense attorney, it happened in front of bailiffs that were there, the police department's right there.
So it's actually in the courtroom?
In the courtroom during, right before they started the proceeding, there was two parties, right? So someone from this side came over this way and stabbed that person. They let him go, but they were trying to figure out a way to hold him because he wasn't Navajo. And he asserted that.
Oh.
And so it became a jurisdictional issue, and so they had to let him go, but somebody was smart enough to say, hey, let's, cause he was parked in the parking lot, and they looked in the car and they saw, cause they could smell alcohol in his breath. So they looked at his car, and there was open containers in the car, so they were able to hold him for that for a little bit longer. I guess they have only so much time that they can
Right.
hold non-Navajos, and then by law, they had to let him go.
Right.
And it was long enough finally for Apache County Sheriff's Department deputy to finally come out. They were about ready to have to let him go again,
Oh, jeez.
and he finally got taken into custody.
That's stupid.
Was this recently or?
About 2-3 weeks ago, maybe? I
So
thought it was the last month.
he's doing time after race.
Yeah, so he's being prosecuted
For attempted?
by Apache County, not Navajo Nation.
Yes, you need to work out that type of jurisdiction, unfortunately. Okay, so how are we dealing with this? We are making them safe. We are giving them, we're expressing empathy and warmth to make them feel safe. And we are inviting someone else in to make sure that we've done everything correctly and that we're not losing our focus. You will take on other people's problems. You need to be careful. This will eat you up. This is what burnout is all about. But if it's a crisis situation, it happens very, very rapidly. That you will empathize with them so much that suddenly you'll be feeling the same negativity that they're feeling. And that's one of the reasons why you need to have somebody come in and monitor the two of you. Monitor you with that other client. Okay, pre-contemplation stage, clients do not see any need to make a change, of course. We were talking about the pre-contemplation stage. They do not see their behaviors or feelings as problems. They blame others for their problems. This is a very common, especially common with, I hate to pick on an ethnic group, but this is very common with white people. They try to blame everybody else. It's the Indians' fault that you guys lost all your land. I don't know, that's a tough one. I was just talking about history with Marius, and he says, you know, I just read this history book, and it says that, that Indians gave us all, they gave the Westerners all their land. And he says, that's not right. You know, they're blaming the victims is what they're doing. And this is very, very common, especially with Westerners. They try to find somebody else to blame. Now, there's a reason for that. It's because of their religion, the major Christian religion. If you are to blame for something, then you don't get to go to heaven. So this is one of the reasons why Catholics go to confession all the time. They're always trying to rationalize their behavior. It's never negative enough not to get to go to heaven. You have to follow all these steps in order to get to go to heaven. If you're Catholic, of course, you have to go to confession, and you have to confess, and then you get to go to heaven, because you've confessed all your sins and whatnot.
So it's kind of, it's a cultural.
It's a cultural thing, yeah. Blame is huge as far as Christians are concerned. You try to blame anybody else other than yourself, otherwise you don't get to go to heaven.
Do you think that's true just more for like American Westerners, or is that true, also true in Europe?
Oh, Europe, it's worse. In the Catholic areas in Europe, it's terrible. No one will take responsibility for anything. It's just,
So it's like Ireland, the Protestants and the Catholics going there.
It is-
Perfect example.
exactly. The Germans never do anything wrong.
So you think that's like a part of historical trauma for Westerners? A lot of the wars that went back and forth, especially with the
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Muslims and
Oh, sure.
back and forth fighting over the Crusades and stuff like that.
We'll look at, or the Christians fighting against the Protestants. I mean, they had all these wars going on in Europe. For hundreds of years, the Catholics are fighting the Protestants. It's interesting, because if you read English history and read about the Spanish, they look like the biggest devils in the world. They blame the Spanish for everything. When they paint pictures of the Spanish, they look like they've got these pointed beards and they have pointed noses, and they look, you're ready to see the horns coming out of their heads. So if you read English history, the Spanish are always to blame for just about everything. If you remember, the pirates were English, and they were robbing, or they were stealing the gold from the Spanish. So who's the good guys and who are the bad guys? Is it the pirates are the good guys and the Spanish are the bad guys? And according to the English, the pirates are the good guys.
Yeah, a lot of them were from Welsh, England,
Exactly.
and like Dover. and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah, exactly. As curious as that is. So yeah, blaming is huge.
So do you think that,
as far as Western men, and it's endemic.
you think that kind of, if you're in America, even if you're of European descent, just living in this country, do you think a lot of that kind of culture passes on to other
I would say so.
nationalities?
I would say so. Yeah. Trying to blame somebody else for your problems. Yeah, that's a very Christian thing to do. As strange as that may seem. Oh, God, are you gonna write me up for attacking Christians? Don't do it. Moving from something the client cannot change to something that they can improves their efficacy. So what you're looking at is, you're not really trying to assign blame. What you're trying to do is trying to find something that they can actually deal with, and rather than this tragic situation that you need to find a victim and a perpetrator. You need to deal with something else.
You know, you just shed light on something I never really bothered really looking at. I just always viewed, like Western culture, especially early
Right.
Western culture, our involvement with as evil and bad, and I never really understood why they were the way they were in all of the dynamics, geopolitics at the time, and religion and things that they had gone through before they came over.
Sure.
And how, that's why things played out the way they did when they got here. That's why there was a clash of cultures. It's really interesting.
And the clash is still going on. I mean, we still have the Redskins, the Washington Redskins. Now, why would the capital of the country have this insulting name for their football team? Why would they do that? Because as far as, what, you don't care about the Redskins? You're a Redskins fan? No? Okay. Why would they do that? Well, why? Because they see, they never blame themselves for anything.
Well, I find it
They never
interesting,
accept blame.
I find it interesting too, because like you said, it still goes on, because like, when I was younger, it's not as bad now, but it probably still goes on, but I know when I was younger, a lot of Navajo kids were ashamed to be Navajo.
Okay.
They were ashamed to have long hair. They were really ashamed. And so there was kind of a disconnect, and I see a lot of younger people now, more not assertive necessarily, but they're willing to claim who they are, and so it's different. I think that it's shifting.
Right.
Maybe as we move further away, and another generation takes over, we're able to kind of move past
Right.
some of that trauma. But it's interesting. I never thought about what was going on to them before
Exactly.
they got here.
They're always trying to find somebody else to blame.
And then how that plays out now, and then it
Right.
gets interjected into Navajo culture as well, because Navajo culture is you don't blame someone else. We have a philosophy, it means you have to be self-reliant. And you have to-
Existentialism.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
It's
Stacy.
it's interesting.
Fascinating stuff. It just happened yesterday. It just happened yesterday. Donald Trump said that the whole impeachment process was a lynching. Well, the word lynching is a very inflammatory word. It has to do with hanging people, vigilante hanging of people. If we look at all the lynchings that have occurred in the United States, 3/4 of all the lynchings it was black people that were being lynched for usually fairly obtrusive problems, what they did. But he used that word yesterday, and then he wouldn't admit that he shouldn't have used the word. And the Republicans now are supporting his use of the word lynch, which is something that it's kind of like using the N-word. It's okay if African Americans use the N-word, but if anybody else does, then they're attacking African Americans. Lynching is the same way. African Americans can use the word lynch because they were the ones being lynched. But white people can't use it. So what we're doing is, or what's happening, is they're dissipating the blame by using this word, this inflammatory word. Now, all of a sudden, people aren't thinking of the impeachment, people are thinking of his use of the word lynch. And eventually, of course, he'll say he didn't say it.
It's interesting you talk about that too, because like if you ever look at what Breitbart News puts out, people that like Cannon that he had in his
Right.
administration, they put forth a lot of that kind of propaganda that they're the true victims. That they're the real victims in America. And they frame themselves that way, and I think that's why they starting to talk like that, because they really starting to believe that they're the true victims and they need to go out and defend themselves against people.
Right.
Everybody else is attacking them. It's like paranoia.
Has to do with blame and victimhood.
And what you're talking about, it really translate with that, is how they like to blame other people.
Exactly. It comes from Christianity. Christianity is really big on finding out who's the good guy and the bad guy is. Good guy's Jesus, and the bad guy's Satan, right? Okay. It's easy stuff. Okay. Satan, get thee behind me, I think, or something like that. Okay. If the client states that her boss is unfair to her, the practitioner might see her part of the problem as her inability to figure out what she can do to be treated more fairly. The practitioner isn't denying that the client has a problem, merely pointing out the portion of the problem that the client can't control. The reality is, I can't do anything about my boss. I can't change his mind. All I can do is change the way that I react to what he's doing. That is the only thing that I can control. So me complaining about my boss is just belly aching. I almost said bitchy. It's just me belly aching, okay? But that doesn't help anything. We're not taking care of the problem. The biggest problem is how I react to the negativity of the situation. I need to react better. Okay, so that's the only thing I can control. And that's what you need to get your client to do. It's okay if they complain about their husband hitting them all the time. That's not the problem. The problem is, how do they react? How are they going to react? And of course, the answer to that question may be, find a halfway house someplace, find a secure location to get away from him. If the client states that the problem is the city's failure to adequately maintain their neighborhood, the practitioner might help the clients to see their part of the problem as their lack of information about how to effectively lobby for services. It's easy to complain about things, but what we need to do is find a solution to the problem. And the best solution to the problem is dealing with the problem, rather than just complaining. If a mother is upset because her son is doing poorly in school and wants to make him bring up his grades, the practitioner will accept this as a valid concern and work with the mother to figure out what she wants to change about herself, how she reacts to her child. Complaining about the kid getting poor grades isn't going to do anybody any good. You need to figure out a solution to the problem. How are you going to change to make things better? The mother may be focusing too much on what her child is not doing, or may not have encouraged him. She may not have discussed the problem with his teachers. She needs to be proactive instead of reactive. That's what we're trying to teach people, is to be proactive, to take care of the problem before it occurs, or to take care of the problem when it does occur. Instead of just yelling at the kid, she needs to encourage the kid. She needs to go see the principal.
How much of a person's problem do you think is directly related to the way they were parented, the way they were raised?
Well, I think that we learn our parenting skills from our parents,
So do you think when they're exhibiting these kind of behaviors, do you think it's because that's what was modeled?
because that's
to
the
them?
way they were taught when they were a child. My wife complains about her mother being crazy all the time. She complains about it constantly. But sometimes I see her reacting like her mother did or would have to the situation. And then I tell her, and then she gets mad at me.
So is family history important when you're?
Tons. It's very important. And this is so Freudian. Unfortunately, this is really Freudian. People don't like Freud because he talks about sex all the time. But that's not all that if we're dealing with here. We also need to deal with how you were treated as a child, how you felt as a child. That's what we need to deal with. Because that will tell us how you're going to react in the future.
So that's kind of Pavlov too, being conditioned.
Exactly. You've been conditioned by your parents to react this way. When in a bad situation, if dad always ran off and got away from the situation, guess what's going to happen when you're in that kind of a situation? You're going to take off. If he went to the bar and got drunk, then that's going to be a coping technique that you have learned from your father, and you'll try to do exactly the same thing.
Huh.
It's like the girl that was she was a daddy's girl, and the only way she could get him to pay attention to her was to flirt with him, and then he would react to her. He would it didn't have anything to do with sex. It didn't have anything to do with sex, and that's why when she flirted with somebody, she couldn't have sex with that person, because this is how she got her father to interact with her, or to pay attention to her.
It's interesting, there's a slight parallel with now with culture too, because I always used to hear a lot of older people when people would complain about someone, they would say, meaning the men in his family probably exhibit that behavior and he learned it from them. And I just always thought about the tree or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, was kind of what I always related it to.
See, you could write your own psychology book. And it would fit with Rogers. That's the way Rogers feels. I'm sorry, you can't come in here with an Oklahoma Sooners. But you have to sit over here. I used to live in Oklahoma. For 4 years I lived in Oklahoma. It's your fault. Now, there's a flat place, Oklahoma, and we got hit by tornadoes frequently, very frequently. We were talking about tornadoes before. If the client is a young single mother of 3 children who states that she doesn't have enough money for food and housing, even though she works full-time, the practitioner can work with her on her desire for more income so that she can better provide for her family and can tell her about whatever additional resources might be available to her to provide for her family, to help her provide for her family. Yeah, we're trying to solve the problem. We're not finding who's to blame, we're not allowing her to be a victim, we're looking for solutions.
This is like being a financial advisor.
Yes. I guess.
I went to, through the military, like a lot of us got to go to financial counseling for free. And I had a financial advisor, and it was interesting. I would sit through when you would talk to other people, but he'd be like, you have to make a choice. One way is gonna lead to this, and do you wanna do you still wanna stay poor, or do you know? Do you wanna have savings? He would put it for you very logically for you to choose. It's your choice. He laid it out in front of you.
It's all logic.
And then he would help people figure out through their financial problems. But it just, real similar.
I could be a financial advisor. Motivational interviewing can be very helpful. Motivational interviewing is client-centered counseling that helps clients increase motivation by assisting them in exploring and resolving ambivalence about making changes. A lot of times we are stuck. We are paralyzed, paralysis by analysis. All we're doing is thinking about our problem and we're not doing anything about it. That's the biggest problem. So what we need to do is get our clients to solve their own problems. The reality is that we are making suggestions, but they have to solve their own problems. The client will always solve their own problems. Rolling with resistance, clients have valid insights and ideas about their situation. Arguments for change are avoided by clients. If they change is not easy. Change is the hardest thing in the world. And they don't want to do it. They want to stay the same. They want to blame somebody and be the victim. It's more fun that way. But nothing gets fixed. So what we need to do is get them motivated to make a change. The change is not easy. The hardest thing in the world is to stop smoking. It's the most addictive substance on the earth is tobacco. And you guys gave it to the world. Thank you very much.
I say it's soda. I say it's sugar. I say it's sugar.
No, it's not sugar. It's tobacco, as weird as that is. But nobody wants to change. Nobody wants to stop doing the things that they enjoy. I probably need to stop drinking so much pot, okay? I drink that red stuff, okay? Code Red. It tastes like cherries. I love
Hardcore,
it.
man.
All I need to do is stop doing it. But I don't want to because I like it. It's fun. I got nothing else to do over the weekend while I'm grading your stuff. So I drink Code Red. The practitioner indicates a willingness to work on the problem identified by the client. Resistance often arises when the client is required to see the practitioner. In other words, we're trying to make them change. They don't want to change, so it's hard for them to come in to see us. But we need to motivate them to go ahead and change. We were talking about a sedentary lifestyle before. It's tough. You know, if you're lazy and don't want to get off your dead butt, then you're not going to get off your butt. You're not going to exercise. If you need to go out and walk or run or lift weights or do something, just get off your fanny. My God, we can't get anybody to do this. We can't get people to change because they like being the victim and they can always blame somebody else. Which might have something to do with what's going on upstairs. You keep blaming the colonialists. I was talking to, who was I talking to? Oh, Jeremiah and Marius the other day. And they were saying, you know, this is colonialism wasn't good, but now we can't go back. If we go back, we lose our telephones, we lose our computers, nobody wants to lose their cell phone. It's the most important thing in the whole wide world is your cell phone. But that's part of colonialism, right?
Not necessarily.
Sure
I think
it
people
is.
tie things together like that, but, I think we could, like, I was just actually talking about this the other day, the story of Navajo, the next door creation stories. We've always changed worlds, we've always migrated, moved forward,
You've always adapted.
and we've always adapted, we've always taken new tools in, so a computer doesn't make us not the net. A cell phone doesn't make us less Navajo. It's the way we think, the way we identify ourselves, the language we use. I think that's, as long as we identify ourselves as children of the holy people, we could have any kind of technology. We could be out in space and spaceships and still be Diné.
So were you colonized at all? I mean, if you're that adaptive, you can be
We should be.
Diné.
We should be. And I think that was the reason, one of the reasons Diné College was built, to reinstill some of that kind of thinking about taking what's good for you out of any situation and using it for yourself, but still remaining true to who you are.
Okay.
I think that's decolonization, because that was the whole, what he's saying, it's like the school, because you're really anti, like, colonists or whatever, and you're trying to say, let's go back. Like,
You're trying to find somebody to blame
Yeah.
other than yourself is what's going on.
But, like,
See,
then
we're in
finally-
this situation.
Yeah, but finally, like, when you finally get to sit down and talk with somebody, and then they're like, okay, so you want to decolonize, does that mean you actually want to go back to before we ever came in contact? And in here, I remember everybody in the room was like, wait, that's what it means? So they're
Exactly,
like, no
exactly.
computer, no phone, no
Right.
TV, and I'm like, I like all that stuff. I'm too into it. I don't
Right.
think I could go back.
Right. Well, you
So-
watch a television program, how many Navajos are on that television program?
Isn't it?
At all.
But
Or even natives, right?
It's still none.
Or even Hispanics, my God, there's not even any of this.
Because if you, I mean, the reason I say all this technology is not a part of colonization is because if we go back to, if everybody were to go back to 1491, then that means Westerners would have to give up technology too, because that's not necessarily theirs. If you look at
Oh.
binary code that computers run off, the 10100 came from us. Without it, you guys wouldn't have computers either. Or not you guys,
Oh,
like
no.
like you, but I mean.
But they would have
Westerners.
figured something else out.
Then we would have figured something else out too.
Potentially.
We're human beings too, all have the same capabilities. There was technologies that were in America that weren't in Europe.
But it's a question of blaming and victimhood. Are you guys victims?
I think a lot of that comes from, where I think really, there's like, some people are secure and they don't really care what other people think. And some people are insecure. And so there's these two polars and everybody falls somewhere along that prism.
Right.
And I think people who talk about colonialism are addressing people that have those insecurities, cultural insecurities. And then,
Right.
I think the point is not to stay there though. That's just
Right.
a part of the path, then you go back to, you can, who you are. You could be, I know Navajos who are taught these medicine, but they work at universities too,
Right.
like at NAU and ASU,
Sure.
They use technology and they get up in the morning, they pray for themselves, and they have that cultural identity.
Right.
Doesn't bother them as much anymore. So,
Right, and the question is historical trauma. I mean, that's really what we're talking about.
There's no such thing.
I'm sorry?
There's no such thing.
There isn't?
In my opinion, there's no such thing as
It's
historical trauma. Because
So you've adapted to whatever has happened to you.
it's just, we shouldn't focus on that. So, because
Exactly.
whatever happened to them in the past is what
That's-
happened to them and maybe their kids. But other than that, what we're doing right now, that's not us.
Okay.
So, I don't think that's a thing.
I think with the colonialism thing, I think it became like a catchphrase, and a lot of people started to run with it.
I know, but it's being caught up on the third floor.
And I think because the reason you have to understand is a little history here is, going back 20 years ago, we were still being taught that Columbus discovered America. That was what was being taught right over here at Taylor Elementary School. Go to any elementary
Okay.
school. So the narrative was very Eurocentric, and a lot of people are just now reclaiming, exerting some sovereignty, and people are just being able to push back on those colonial encroachments, those ways of thinking, and saying, hey, we have our.
We
own
just
way
had
of
this
thinking.
conversation yesterday in the psych and law class.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it's big, and, but I think the thing that people have to keep in mind is you have to take it in proportion. Sure, there's colonialism, sure, it still exists, and sure, it still
Right.
affects us, but you can't get caught up on that. You have to move, you have to adjust, and you have to just accept that there's always gonna be some type of encroachment.
You have to adapt. That's what, so Cheyenne doesn't suffer from historical trauma.
I guess so.
You don't think so? Does anybody? Is anybody in here suffering from historical trauma?
I'd say I definitely do.
You do?
I have,
Okay.
Like, my great-grandparents were taken to Flagdale. And obviously there are people in the community who are still facing issues that not directly connect to that,
Right.
but definitely how the families coped with what happened when
Right.
they came back. And it's been, a revolving door of alcoholism, abuse, incest, these
Right.
different things. And I definitely do believe it is a real thing.
Okay.
But coming to terms with it and not saying that I'm a victim, I'm saying I'm a survivor,
Okay.
of these things. And
Right.
obviously being able to move forward, and I wouldn't say decolonizing, I would say recolonizing my mind
Right.
to adjust to the times.
Okay. So we've got two different perspectives.
I believe that historical trauma is a real thing, and my mind has been changed on that recently. I didn't really believe in that before.
Right.
And I see it now. I'm aware of, I guess now I'm aware of it, and so I see it, and I definitely think a lot of people on the reservation have been touched by it. Even, people always think that the trauma happened when we went on the long walk and we were fighting, but people forget that kids were being kidnapped from the reservation to go to boarding schools, and a whole generation are missing, like,
Kids that were being kidnapped from the reservation before that.
but it continued.
By other tribes.
But it continued up into this point, and
Right.
when we're talking about a large scale, every kid in the house being taken is different from when one or two kids go from the community,
Right.
from a raid. We're talking about whole generations. My family got touched by this. My great-grandfather on my dad's side, they took the kids to Keys Canyon and said that they told his parents that they'll be back on Thanksgiving break and Christmas break. So my great-grandfather went to Keys Canyon on Thanksgiving. When they didn't show up and they didn't come home, he said, "Where's my kids?" And they said, "We don't know where they're at." I guess what had happened is they brought in all the kids and they didn't tell the parents. There was all these buses lined up. And they just put people in buses, and this one was going to Carlisle, this one was going to Riverside, this one was going to Salt Lake City. And they didn't even keep track of where the kids went or anything in it. So
Then they never came back.
they tracked down one of my grandfathers. They found out where he was. And my great-great-grandfather said, "I'm taking my son back." They didn't know where the other one went. It wasn't until he graduated high school and he came back on his own. Luckily, he remembered, but there's other, I know I've read books by people who were taken at a really young age, and they were raised in home and placement programs. And they thought, there's this one book written by this lady, she thought she was Jewish for the longest time until she found out something about her history, that she was actually Navajo. And she started coming back trying to identify her family, but there were whole groups of people. And that didn't just happen just with Navajos, with other tribes, but even out in Canada. And they're, in fact, in Canada, they're fighting legally over the records.
Yeah.
The
It was worse in Canada.
Yeah, they want to destroy all the records so that there's no records, and people are saying, "Hold on, we want to know where we came from." So that was how it touched my family, and because of that, we have a loss of ceremonies and language and culture in our own family. Big part, half our family was taken. So our family's small on my dad's side compared to other people's families, because half the kids didn't come back.
So how do we deal with this? I mean, if we're dealing with somebody from this reservation, how do we deal with this? Or do we have to deal with this?
I think
In
it has
your
to be,
case,
I
we
think it has to
do.
be acknowledged,
In your case, we do.
I think first it has to be acknowledged. After it's acknowledged, then you look at how
Right.
it's affecting your life and try
Well,
to.
whether it's affecting you.
Yeah, then you try to counter for it. And I think that's where a lot of the talk about columnism is just awareness that, hey, the reason why things are messed up right here
Right.
is it's not necessarily completely your fault.
Right.
There are things that happened that set the stage for
But
what
are
you were
we,
born into.
are we looking at blame and victimhood again?
I think no matter what, you're gonna fall into that paradigm somewhere.
Yeah.
I think no matter what, and I think it's, the more you revisit who you are as a Navajo, you're able to come out of it.
Right.
I think.
If I can find somebody to blame, they're always going to be to blame. And if I find somebody to blame, then guess what I'm going to be? I'm going to always be the victim. And what we're trying to train these people to do, these individuals that have a problem with this, not historical trauma, but any problem, is we're trying to teach them to take care of their own problems. That they need to focus on how they can fix things. And if we are focusing on blame and victimhood, then that has there's no way to fix that.
Like,
That's
yeah,
impossible to fix.
another issue, like, a lot of, not to say incest or anything didn't happen here before European contact, but I think the amount and the scale that happened on after, especially with boarding schools, because that was one of the issues, was a lot of the kids that were taken were being physically abused, sexually abused at these schools, and they were run by Christian organizations for the large part, by churches, and some of them were being run by military, like officers, they were run like military schools.
Right.
And they were being physically assaulted, and now now the survivors come back, and they were victims of abuse their whole life, growing up all the way from first grade to graduation. Now they're reintegrating in their community, now they're abusers themselves, and then that cycle really picked up. And I think that's why we have such a problem with it on the reservation.
Right.
So historical trauma, I think it still affects us. The cycles it started are still,
Right, but
still going.
the problem is blame and victimhood. That's the problem.
Yeah, you can't get stuck there.
Yeah.
You can't get
If you
stuck.
get stuck there, there's no place to go. You're in a hole that you'll never get out of. It's a rut that you'll never get out of. And of course, we're trying to make your lives better because you have a select problem. Well, if this is your problem and we find somebody to blame, then you'll always be the victim. And now we've got no place to go. We can't help anybody. That's what we're talking about.
I think that's why I don't really like, or don't really say that historical trauma is really a thing, because I think that started when there's that news that came out about this mother from Chinle, and I forgot if she did it out here or in Phoenix, but she took her baby, who's still an infant, I think, strolled her out into middle of nowhere,
Oh,
left her there, came back, and then here she was, oh yeah, I just did it, and they're like, why? Historical trauma, and people were like, what? Like, what are you talking about?
Where's the logic there?
That's what I'm saying, this is why I don't think it's a thing, it's just a way for people to do something bad and say, oh, it's historical trauma, something that happened. Yes, it's something that happened, but just don't go right to that.
Right.
Like, figure it out first before you start blaming something that happened over 100 years
Well,
ago.
the whole point is that this is a very resilient population. And you've dealt with whatever problems you've had. You've adapted to whatever situation you've been in. So yes, there is historical trauma. The whole concept of historical trauma came out of the AIM, that American Indian movement of the 1970s and 1980s. Bonnie Durand and what's his name? What was his name?
Dennis
The other-
Banks, Russell Means.
No, well, I was thinking of Bonnie's husband.
Oh,
He's actually the guy that wrote the book. But it came out of, didn't come off the reservation. Historical drama didn't come off the reservation, it came from urban Indians who didn't understand the culture. And they were the ones that were complaining about historical trauma. That's where it started.
I
And
think
then-
there's,
Then everybody else kind of accepted it.
I think what you're talking about with the separation and thinking the term historical trauma, I see the same thing today. The other thing, the issue I see with that, along those same parallels is the word indigenous.
Mhm.
So a lot of people who are in academia
Right,
like to use the word indigenous.
you bet. It makes us feel good.
But a lot of people who are traditional don't like the term indigenous either. A lot of people prefer the term Diné, like that,
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's our own language and it's
Exactly.
our own identity.
Right.
So some people assert that that's what we should be identifying ourselves as, who we are,
Right.
not using the English
Right.
language. So I see the same
Right.
thing going on sometimes.
Yeah, but see, in academia, we have to identify all people, of all indigenous peoples. We have to identify all.
It's
native
easy.
peoples.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a word. Yeah, all tribes want to be called by their tribal name. But the other problem is, you guys aren't Navajo, you're Diné,
Yeah.
right? The Comanche aren't Comanche, they're the Numina, right?
Well, Navajo's a mispronunciation. A lot of people don't know that story either.
I know. But the point is, everybody wants to be called by their tribal name, but when we're talking about everybody in general, the 567 tribes, or however many there are, we have, 62 now? Is it 62?
63 if you counted the one Trump added on there.
It's-
Yeah, he federally recognized the tribe last year.
Right. Good way to go, Donald, he did something right. Yeah, they have to use a term, and that term is indigenous, or it's American Indian, or it's Native American, or whatever. But, you know, there just has to be.
Well, it used to be American Indian, then people said, oh, we're not Indians, and
It's American Indian
People
now, that's
picked
what
up-
the federal government recognizes as the proper term.
that's what it changed to indigenous, and then,
I know, but that's those guys back east mostly, those fun guys back east. A motivational interviewing strategy that involves pointing out an incongruity between the client's present behavior and something they value or want. What are we doing? Oh, this is the pre-contemplation stage. This may increase clients' motivation to change, and of course, that's the hard part, getting people to change. The goal is to move the client to contemplating that there is a problem and that they can work on their problem. And of course, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get you guys moving. I'm not you guys, but you're all practitioners. We're trying to get the client moving. Identifying discrepancies, a motivational interviewing strategy that involves pointing out an incongruity between the client's present behavior and something they value or want. This may increase the client's motivation to change. The goal is to move the client to contemplating that there is a problem that they can work on. And of course, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find something for them to do. The client, only the client can fix themselves. I cannot fix anybody. I can tell you what your problem is. I can tell you that you need to change, but unless you change, then there's not going to be any change. So that's the whole point. Working with clients, the contemplation stage, there is a readiness to believe that there is a problem. That's the client believes that there is a problem. The client can acknowledge the advantages of changing, but it is also aware of the costs. Stop smoking, lose weight, start exercising. These are all changes that they can say, yeah, geez, I wish I were as skinny as I was when I was in the 3rd grade. I don't know. That would be nice. I was healthy then, I'm not healthy now. Oh, good, he's walking without a cane. Wilson's walking without a cane. Last time I saw him, he had a cane. The contemplation stage, we express empathy. We show them that we understand what they're going through. It's important to show empathy at all stages of change. This provides acceptance. Empathy shows acceptance. We understand who you are and that you need to change. There we go. Okay. Contemplation stage, I know that you know that your drinking is a problem, but right now stopping seems impossible. That's a funny thing. Wait a minute, it gets better. I understand that you think it would improve your health if you gave up smoking, but that giving up smoking feels almost impossible. Is that it? Yeah, let's stop right here, we'll pick this up next time. Important conversations we had today, because this is what we're going to be dealing with when we start dealing with clients from the reservation. We're going to be dealing with people on a broad spectrum. As far as traditionalism is concerned, as far as historical trauma is concerned, very important conversation,
So
okay?
the point is, or what we should leave with is that we're still here and we're still working on it, at least we haven't totally given up on anything. And we're trying to make it better, right?
Well, that's the whole point about American Indians, is the fact that you guys are not only still here, but you still recognize yourselves as who you are.
So let's leave with that.
That's you.
Yeah.
You can't force everybody to have your ideas,
Yeah.
or maybe we can. I need to squeeze past you. Turn off my, otherwise I'll say something embarrassing, get in trouble.